And yes, it's confirmed that we're recording the meeting, so with the Chair's permission, I'll just take this adherent. Councillor Allison, I see that you're here. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan's here. Councillor Convery?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper? Councillor Cooper, I take it that you're here? I'll take that as a confirmation from Councillor Cooper. I see
translation of that, please.
I see that Councillor Cowie is here, Councillor Craig is here, Councillor Donnelly is also here, as is Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Fagan?
Here.
Councillor Harrow's here, Councillor Horsham's here. I have an apology for Councillor Grant Hose, and Councillor McCreary is substituting for him. Councillor Loudon, you're here, as is Councillor McAdams and Councillor McCallan. Councillor Mars?
Yes, I'm here, Pauline, thanks.
Councillor Miller is here, Councillor Nealon is here, Councillor Nugent is here, Councillor Razak?
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Ross? No response from Councillor Ross. Councillor Scott is here, Councillor Walker is here, Councillor Wark is here, and Councillor Watson. I've just been advised that Councillor Cooper does not appear in the list of participants, so can I just double check? Councillor Cooper, are you at the meeting? Nothing from Councillor Cooper, thank you. As far as external representation is concerned, John Mulligan? You're here. Dr. Nagi Iskander? No. Gillian Coulter? No. Andy Harvey?
Here.
Thank you. Anne-Marie Hobson?
Apologies.
Apologies for Anne-Marie Hobson.
Yes.
Okay. Hilary Kirby?
Here.
And Christine Hall. Okay, thank you. Chair, I'll hand back. Is there anyone who I have not mentioned who is actually at the meeting?
Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Cooper, thank you.
I
Chair,
also see. Sorry.
Councillor Allison. Gillian Hall was admitted to the meeting.
I have Gillian Coulter and Christine Hall.
Pauline, I just admitted Gillian Coulter after you said her name.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you now, Chair, to continue the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Pauline. Thanks for going through that. There's a few people who are not currently on mute. Could you put yourself on mute unless you've been asked to speak? Thanks, just to keep the noise and the echoes down. Oh, it's Christine Hall coming back in. Okay, before we begin this morning, everybody, I would like to say thank you to all of the officers and the admin staff who've been involved in putting these papers together for today's meeting during these rapidly changing and still slightly strange times. Your work is much appreciated. I know things have been extremely difficult for so many people. And it goes without saying as well, I'd like to offer a personal thanks to all of the teachers, school staff, parents and carers who are helping our children and young people get through this challenging time. Everybody else who's in the meeting today, I know that a number of you have children or young people who are at home just now, or you've got other caring responsibilities which have been heightened at the moment. Please don't worry about it. If you need to leave or if something happens, just let Polly know when you can as per the procedure which we spoke about, and we appreciate your presence today as well. So thank you for coming in. Begin then properly. Does anybody have any declarations of interest before we start? No. Okay, thank you everyone. Moving on, item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting which took place 27th of October, begins on page 5 of your pack. Does anyone have any items which they would like to raise from the minutes of the previous meeting? No. Okay, I propose that we accept them as they are.
Second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Craig. Okay, moving on then on to our monitoring items, which begin with item 3, which is on page 13 of your pack. This is revenue budget monitoring 2020 to 2021, and Louise is going to take us through this. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Chair. This is the standard revenue monitoring report providing information on the actual expenditure against the budget for the period 1st of April through to the 6th of November, which is period 8 of our financial year. It's the third report presented to committee for the financial year 2021, and it also, as normal, outlines the specific costs incurred in relation to the resources COVID response to date. Paragraph 4 contains updated information in relation to the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding position for the financial year, and for PEF, spending commitment to date as at the 6th of November is 6.031 million, with 3.654 million still to spend, and this includes all known staffing for the full financial year through to the 31st of March. PEF spend is expected to be impacted by the restrictions schools are facing as a result of the pandemic. Programmes supporting groups of children and young people, trips and extracurricular activities, and those provided via external professionals are all restricted as a result, with an impact on their ability to spend this year. It is anticipated the PEF 2021 carry forward as at the 31st of March in terms of our forecast will be in the region of 2.450 million, and this will be available for the school session April to June in line with the PEF guidance, and this will continue to be monitored and reported. Flexibility on PEF funding to support the COVID response has been announced by the Scottish Government, and again this will continue to be monitored in relation to the Council's overall COVID position this year. In relation to SAC, spend and commitment is 1.577 million, with 0.386 million still to spend. And again, this includes all our known staffing to the 31st of March. And as this is a specific grant, we will only be funded for what we've actually spent. So committee will continue to be updated with this position on both the PEF and SAC budgets for the 2021 financial year as we go through the rest of the year. Turning to the main financial implications of the report, paragraph 6 outlines as at the 6th of November, we are reporting an overspend of 4.008 million against the phased budget, and this is outlined in Appendix A. Variance explanations are outlined also in Appendix A, and this overspend in the main is COVID related and reflects overspends relating to the additional education recovery teachers employed in one-year fixed-term contracts and short-term supply. Also, the increased cost of supply teachers based on the payment arrangements of the SNCT guidelines, expenditure incurred in the operation of the hubs for key worker children during the first lockdown, costs of sanitisation stations, PPE, cleaning supplies and enhanced cleaning regimes for our schools and establishments, and the reduction in the budgeted income for early years fees and music tuition, all as a result of the ongoing pandemic. The Council has received funding for specific education costs relating to the pandemic, including additional teachers, support staff and mobilising schools for reopening, including the cleaning and PPE costs. This is 2.127 million as at the 6th of November, with total revenue funding for the year of 4.93 million already confirmed. These income sources are not netted off against expenditure in the appendices. Instead, to allow consistent reporting across the Council of all expenditure in relation to the pandemic, all costs are collated and reported to the Exec Committee, where all income received is reported in its entirety. Budget variants are proposed in the normal way as set out at the bottom of Appendix A, and these reflect updates to the education budget from the last reported period from the 11th of August through to the 6th of November. And in the main, they cover some standard activity across 3 or 4 main areas, transfers and reserves to meet project staffing, central funding received to reflect Council commitments for the Modern Apprentices programme, the creation of budget to reflect the receipt of external funding through the Transitional Support Fund, the realignment of budget to reflect how we are delivering and spending the money for PEF and early years, and the realignment of budget within the resource to reflect activity as part of the Devolved Management Scheme and EMA payments. If I can refer committee back to paragraph 2, the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations. An overspend of 4.008 million at the 6th of November is noted, and this in the main relates to education pressures associated with its COVID response, and the proposed budget variants as set out at the bottom of Appendix A of the report are approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Louise, for going through that. Does anybody have any comments or questions on monitoring item 3 just now? Councillor Allison.
Louise, can I maybe just get a little bit of clarity on the overspend? What's the projection for the end of year, and is that a net figure when you take into account the likes of the PEF money and maybe the SAC money, which will be underspent? And secondly, the PEF money, if I've read this correctly, you're suggesting there'll be a carryover of 2.5 million, which will be almost double what it was last year. Is there any particular reason for that and for the money not being spent within the current year?
Yeah, and firstly, in relation to our probable outturn, it's not reported. This position is obviously at the 6th of November, so that will be reported as we go through the rest of the year. However, all of the overspend we are saying is COVID related. We're anticipating, or we do have confirmation of the staffing is fully funded in terms of how we recruited for our education recovery teachers and our additional school support assistants. So we are recruiting based on the funding we've received. And that's the same for the mobilisation costs as well. So overall, in terms of our outturn, we are broadly saying our education budget will be in line, and our COVID costs are still being reviewed as part of the overall council position. Our PEF position, I have indicated as part of the report that we are anticipating an underspend. A lot of this is around the fact that there has been restrictions within schools that head teachers haven't been able to spend based on the original plans. A lot of the programmes that are originally intended around family learning programmes, excursions, trips, educational visits, etc. All those types of things have not been possible this year. Again, obviously due to restrictions, travel, etc. Outdoor family learning opportunities, DYW activities, all those things haven't been able to happen, and as a result, we've not been able to spend to the original plans that schools have had. However, the guidance does, as you know, allow us to carry that forward in line with the school session, and we'll hopefully, following what happens through the lockdown, be able to pick that up or be able to carry that forward into later years to support schools in the normal way.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Allison. Thanks, Louise. Any other questions on this just now? Oh, happy to accept the recommendations at 2.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on then, item 4, capital budget monitoring, this time from the period 1st of April last year, this year, no, 2021, 2020, to November last year, 2020. And Lorraine's going to take us through this. Begins on page 19. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. As Chair said, the report starts on page 19 of your papers, and this is the 3rd capital budget monitoring report for education resources. It's the standard report, and the purpose of the report is to provide information to the 6th of November, which is accounting period date of the year. Section 3 gives you the background and just explains again how the budget was set. So we had the revised programme agreed executive committee back in September, and which we reported last time, and then we had adjustments agreed executive committees in both November and December, taking the education programme to 23.153 million for the current year. Section 5 details the financial implications with the information broken down in Appendix A to the report. So as I mentioned, the resources programme for the year is 23.153, and as at 6th of November, we'd spent £10.490 million. In terms of spend for the year to date, obviously we're a couple of months on now. Current information showing spend a little bit ahead of where we thought we would be, with ups and downs across some of our projects, but that's just reflecting timing of spend to date. In terms of looking towards the end of the year, we're working to maximise spend, but obviously progress on any build projects is dependent on the weather, and this year we've also got the pandemic restrictions to take into account, but at the moment I'm not being advised of any issues in terms of that, and any spend that we don't incur at the end of the year will be carried forward into next year with the required budget. So if I can refer committee back to the recommendation section 2 and ask that committee note the education resources budget of 23.153 and spend to the 6th of November of 10.490 be noted. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Lorraine, any comments or questions on this monitoring item? No, happy to accept the recommendations at 2.
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you very much everybody. We're moving on to our final monitoring item, which is item 5. This is workforce monitoring from September and October last year, begins on page 23 of your pack, and Aileen's going to take us through this. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. This is the standard workforce monitoring report for education resources, providing employment information for September, October 2020. So section 4.1 outlines the absence statistics for committee, and for October 2020 the resource absence rate was 4.1%, which represents an increase of 0.5% compared to the previous month, and it is 0.7% lower than the council-wide figure. This translates to a projected annual average for 2021 for the resource of 3.4% compared to a council-wide average of 4.4%. In terms of current position, in terms of COVID absence, the current position as at Wednesday last week was the council-wide absence is sitting at 6.04%, and of that 2.1% is related to COVID absence, special leave and sickness. So sections 4.2 to 4.5, the details are in Appendix 2 of the report. Section 4.2 outlines that there were 269 occupational health referrals during the period, which is a decrease of 56 compared to the same period last year. Section 4.3 details 169 accidents and incidents within the period, and 161 of these relate to physical incidents. Section 4.4 details 1 disciplinary hearing during the period, and no dignity at work complaints were raised during the period. Section 4.5 details the leavers across the resource for the period, and there were 30, and of them 37% completed the exit interview. Appendix 2A gives details of vacant posts across the resource, and during the period 57 posts became vacant, and managers have indicated that all of these will be filled. There are no employee or financial implications associated with information presented, and I will refer committee back to section 2 and ask that the employment information presented within the report for September-October 2020 is noted. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for going through that with us. Does anybody have any comments or questions on monitoring item number 5? Oh, happy to accept.
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. We're moving on to items for decision now. The first one is item number 6, which begins on page 31 of your pack. This is on the acquisition of Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School building, and Lynn Sherry is going to take us through this. Thank you, Lynn.
Morning everyone. Yeah, really just this is a return of the paper that was presented to Education Committee last time round on the proposal to acquire the lease building, which is Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School. So really just a quick recap in terms of the report itself. At 3.1 it talks about the lease coming to an end in January 24, and at which time technically that building is no longer ours and should be returned to Investec. At 4.1 we talk about the estimated growth. Pupil growth coming from the housing developments means that there would be a requirement for an expansion to the school. And at 4.2 we were recognising that this building is now 17 years old and does require some capital investment. Our option last time round was to secure the future of the building, which was the option to buy out the lease and acquire the building to be exclusively ours, and then to pay out the rest of the lease arrangements for the next 3 years at a discounted lease price. And that we would use the annual revenue budget that we have in Education Resources budget to pay for that over an extended period. You'll remember last time there was debate on the condition and the suitability of the building, and we were asked to go back and provide some information, which we have at Appendix 1, in terms of indicative costs for kind of 2 options: buying out the lease, investing in the building, the condition of the building, and the expansion, the growth expansion required, or a new build, including the growth expansion that would be required as well. So you can see that information is listed in Appendix 1. Housing and Tech did provide indicative costs, which you will see there. They also carried out a review of the building and identified the short to medium term requirements, which essentially were a new roof, a complete new roof, windows and a skin to the building. So figures are shown at Appendix 1. The difference ranges in the option to buy, extend, and then invest, ranging between 4.6 to 5.1, and the other option of acquiring or building a new school at 15 to 18 million. Just to highlight a few things from the debate that came up last time, as officers, we still believe the original option offers best value, both in monetary terms and in terms of the suitability of the building. The investment to bring the building up to standard that I've mentioned there, the roof, etc., it would deal with some of the issues that we know we currently have about water ingress, etc. And the replacement of the windows and the skin to the building would improve the energy efficiency, and it would enhance the appearance of the building, this notion of modular, etc. Also to mention is that in terms of space standard, Lady Lourdes is equal, if not it's slightly ahead of the space standard that we have in the rest of the Schools Mod programme, and that wouldn't be a degradation if we move from a 13 classroom extension up to a 16. We would maintain those standards in terms of size and the availability of other resources, size of the dining, size of the gym, etc. If we were to go ahead and get approval today, we are identifying that we would do a feasibility study sooner rather than later, and hopefully by the summer have some information which would allow us, along with the architects and the school and the parent council, to sit down and consult and consider what we would do in terms of expansion, the works, how we would programme in the works of investment, and any kind of restructuring. We know there's a need, there's an opportunity to enhance the layout of the building as we add the additional classrooms on, and we would take the opportunity to review all of those three things with a feasibility study. So really, in summary, just to go back to the recommendations, that we moved to acquire the accommodation of Our Lady Lourdes Primary School. Apologies, that's my telephone, nobody ever phones. That the Executive Director of Housing and Tech conclude the matters in terms of the acquisition from the legal perspective, along with corporate colleagues from legal department, and that in terms of the funding, that we refer it on to Exec Committee so that we can move the revenue annual lease budget into the capital programme to allow us to move forward with this proposal. Okay, I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. Apologies everyone if you hear any noise. I've got a kid in the room just now because I upended an entire cup of coffee during that item, so sorry about that. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this item just now? Yep. Councillor, I think it's Councillor Anderson first, and then Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I just think this is a much more comprehensive report than what we actually had presented to us the last time. It gives us the details, the facts and the figures. I'm just wondering though, when we're doing the feasibility study, will that include any requirement to upgrade the inside, i.e. heating and maybe the kitchen facilities or whatever, as they're coming on 20-year-old?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Lynn, sorry, I've lost you off my screen.
I'm still here. Maybe just to answer that one. Yes,
right, yeah.
We would have a look at it. We recognise that as we move through the age of the buildings, that there may be other works that might need done, and we would need to look at that as well. But essentially, the short to medium term ones that Housing have identified are the big hitters: the roof, the windows, and the skin. But we would look to other things as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Anderson. It's Councillor Allison, I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. What is the life expectancy of the new building, Lynn? Will it be similar to the complete new builds we've made? And secondly, the financing of this, you're talking about moving the leasing charges from a revenue budget to add it to the capital to be able to fund this. Yet the leasing charges are going to be finished within a couple of years. So that's not really going to fund a great deal. And all the leasing charges have been taken up with paying off the lease company, and we're then paying another £500,000 for the porta cabins themselves, which seems quite a lot for the second-hand, which is what they would be, porta cabins. It seems very similar to the figure it would cost us to remove them from the site, and I'm not sure whether that value is a good value for money or not. Can you maybe give us some insight into that, please?
In terms of the budget, the annual 59,000 is a recurring budget, so that will be there until such times as we remove it. So it might take 10 years plus to make that payment to afford the 627,000, I think it is, to acquire the building and then see out the rest of the lease. So it would maybe take us 10 years to do that, but we can use that 59,000 and definitely, if you like, until that is cleared. And finance, I guess, will work out the mechanisms about how we do that on an annual basis. So the exec committee would just be approving that sort of annual process, if you like.
Sorry, just on that point, Lynn, but surely the lease ends in 2 years' time. So therefore, any agreement for these lease payments should have ended at the same time.
Yeah, we would be going into negotiations to end the lease now, to end it early. So that gives us...
No, sorry, that's not the point. If it was going to conclusion, 3 years of the lease left, 2 years during the period we're talking about. So we're using that funding in the revenue budget at the moment to pay off the outstanding lease charges between now and the end of that lease. Agreed?
Yes, we'll use the budget.
We then, at the end of the lease, does the budget surely comes to an end then as well? Because if the leasing charges finish in 2 years' time, surely that money doesn't just stay in the budget when the
Councillor, through me, please, or shorter questions.
Apologies, Kat. Right.
So if I can maybe try and qualify that, then the budget will remain each year. When we say the budgets are being worked on by the council, the first premise we do is we roll over the budget into the next year, and then we look at growth, we look at inflation elements, and we look at savings. So if we were given this building back, then if we were looking at savings, we could look at our budget and say we no longer need that 59,000, we'll give it back. But our intention would be for that to remain in the budget, because it would be a requirement to pay back finance. So finance would front end, if you like. We would go to exec committee for asking for capital approval. So they would buy us out of the lease now, and then we would pay corporate finance back over the next 10 years using that annual budget of £59,000. Once we get 10 years down the line, we can then decide at that point what's needed with that budget. Would it go forward for a saving? Would it be wired to do something else with in terms of need for education resources? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I understand what you're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. It's just getting out a wee bit out of hand there. As I say, I'm sort of dealing with this and keeping one eye on what's going on to my left at the moment. So apologies for being a bit snippy. Does anybody have any further comments or questions on this?
Could,
okay.
Sorry, Councillor, can I just answer the other question about the length of the building? With proper maintenance, you know, a building like this could last 60 years. It's got similar longevity to other buildings that we have across the estate.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you for providing the extra information to the committee today, which we'd asked for the last time, and for the photographs and so on as well. It was really helpful to see that. Okay, I propose that we accept the recommendations as they are on page 31 at 2.
I'll second that, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you. All agreed?
All agreed.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, we're moving on to second item for decision, which begins on page 39 of your pack. This is item 7, and this is the review of the admissions policy for early learning and childcare establishments. And Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. The purpose of this report is to outline the review of the policy for the admission of children into early learning and childcare establishments, and to seek approval of that admissions policy for the allocation of places to local authority and funded provider establishments from March 2021. As noted in section 3, the Council is required to review this policy every 2 years, and this section sets out the context for that, and it notes too in para 3.8 and 3.9 the pause in the introduction of the entitlement to increased nursery hours, and that will now become a statutory entitlement in August 2021. Section 4 sets out the features of the existing policy, and it notes the introduction of early access for 3-year-olds in 2019, and also sets out the broad timeline for admissions. Para 4.2 recognises that families are now able to contact the early years management team directly to raise and resolve issues. So they're now provided with an individual named contact at the point of application. That's been a positive step in improving communications and resolving issues at source. Para 4.3 provides information on the consultation exercise that was undertaken, noting the involvement of families, of early years staff and both local authority and privately funded childcare providers, and they have been able to reflect the views of their own parents and staff as well. Para 4.4 notes a split of approximately 59% of families looking for term time places and 41% looking for places beyond term time, including 16% who have indicated that they would look for 52-week access. That mirrors previous patterns, and I'm pleased to note that it also reflects the planning assumptions that we made for the 1140 expansion plan of a 60-40 split. The team was also very encouraged by the positive feedback that they received from families currently accessing 1140 hours places, both in terms of the experience that children are having and also the increased opportunity that it affords families for employment, training or further study. Section 5 sets out the proposals as attached in Appendix 1. Now, I do note that the layout of that document is maybe not as clear as it could be. Just for clarification, the new proposed policy column notes changes. So the empty box does not imply that we've removed all the priorities. It simply means that there have been no additions or no changes to that priority. So the two areas for change that are noted are, firstly, that families who don't receive their first choice of place in the previous year will be considered now alongside transfer applications, with preschool children being priority 2 and anti-preschool children being priority 3. And also that the distinction now is made between families out with South Lanarkshire who are within the catchment of a South Lanarkshire Council primary school and those out with South Lanarkshire who are not within the South Lanarkshire Council catchment area of one of our primary schools. Para 5.3 goes on to note the process for allocating additional hours. And Para 5.4 notes the range of options available to parents. Now, one of the things that came back through the consultation was the requirement for flexibility, and we believe that this is one way that we can provide flexibility of access to the 1140 hours. And the paper then concludes with the criteria for deferred entry to primary school. Chair, I'd ask that committee approves the recommendations in section 2 that the priorities for admission to all early learning and childcare establishments as detailed in Appendix 1 be approved, that the admissions policy and the process for the allocation of places to all early learning and childcare establishments be implemented from March 21, and finally that the admissions policy for early learning and childcare establishments be endorsed and referred to the Executive Committee for formal approval. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Stuart. Okay, everyone, so we're being asked to approve this policy, which is in your pack for you to see there. Does anyone have any comments or questions on it just now? Okay, can I propose that we accept the recommendations as they are at 2?
Second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, right, thanks everybody. That's us moving on to items for noting now. So the first one begins on excuse me, page 47 of your pack, and this is the Education Resources Plan Q2 Progress Report 2020-2021, and it's Des Dixon who's going to take us through this. Thank you, Des.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. The purpose of this report is to provide the Education Resources Plan Q2 update on 2021 for the period going back to the 1st of April through to the 30th of September. In paragraph 3, we provide the background on the format of the progress report, which will be familiar to many committee members, and how this is used and what we set out to achieve through the Education Resources Plan, and how this links to the Council Plan Connect, as shown in Appendix 1. In paragraph 5.2, we report on progress using the traffic light system, and in paragraph 3, we highlight some key achievements during that period, and which in many ways endorses a remarkable job being done by our staff in our nurseries and our schools and services, as well as the challenges that they've been facing during that period with COVID. Some of the key achievements during that period from April to September are worth just highlighting. Over 2,000 staff attended remote awareness raising sessions on attachment, which is even more pertinent given what we're facing just now. And our development of our young people in the terms of skills for learning in life, it's worth noting that the school leaver destination rate was 95.7% for 2018-19, which again is above the national rate for the 5th consecutive year. And of course, we've started some work on a climate strategy group as well. Our Staff Learning Centre, a website, was created in June 2020 to support continuity of learning and very much valued now. And later on, you'll hear Stuart talk about Chromebooks and mobile devices to support our young learners. And just as an endorsement, Woodhill Early Learning Children's Centre opened on Monday the 14th of September in Kirkmere Hill. And undoubtedly, the work of our Education Psychology Service there during that period is well worth mentioning as well, about the supports that they've been providing for families, children and young people, and indeed our staff during COVID-19 through the development of their health and wellbeing strategies. And of course, we're in this game about young people, so it's always interesting to note that through the Youth, Family and Community Learning programmes, over 500 young people have achieved a range of awards. And I think in some ways, although we've got no red measures, which is a good thing, I think it also highlights that the work of the Council and the efforts of teachers and all staff in schools to support children and young people from when schools opened in August and deserve to be recognised, because it has certainly been a challenge. So this morning, Chair, the committee is asked to approve a number of recommendations that the Education Resources Plan for Q2, as summarised in paragraph 5.2 and as attached to the Appendix 2 of this report, be noted. That a sample of key achievements made by resources to date, as detailed in paragraph 3 of the report, is also noted. We don't really have any areas for improvement, but we've got plenty to do, as I say, as detailed in paragraph 5.4 of the report, be noted. And that the additional scrutiny of reporting and updated status of those measures identified as report later at Q4, mainly due to COVID, as summarised in paragraph 5.5 and is detailed in Appendix 3 of this report, also be noted, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Des. Just to echo your comments about the hard work of staff during this period as well, of course. Does anybody have any comments or questions on item 8 just now? Oh, happy to accept.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Thanks for going through that, Des. Okay, next item we have is item 9, which begins on page 79 in your pack. And this is the update of the risk register and risk control plan. And Lynn Sherry is going to present this. Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you again. This is the kind of normal annual report that comes to all resources or all exec committee and various council department resource committees, if you like, each year. Really just in terms of background, we have a council risk management strategy which says that we have to look at our risks on an annual basis. We have to consider the risks in terms of service delivery, in terms of our planning, and also about our decision making processes as well. And really the purpose of pulling a register together is so that we are aware of what our top risks are and that we are prioritising them and that we apply controls. We consider what those controls are to either eliminate that risk or at least mitigate it down as low as we can. So we do this in accordance with the council scoring mechanism, which is based on likelihood and impact. We start with an inherent score if we do nothing and then move through to a residual score if we are then to put mitigating control measures in place. And we have a risk monitoring group or a management group that helps us do this and helps us monitor the progress and keep our eye on risks, if you like, as we move through the year. So really at 5.5 to highlight there are some changes to the register this year, and obviously COVID-19 has been the major impact right across the services of the council. So it means that the potential risks associated with service disruption, if you like, are increased, and we've had to take recognisance of that. So there are more risks in our risk control register that are scored high at this stage than we normally would in prior years. But we have been very cautious and been careful of being mindful of COVID and the impact it has right across service delivery. And we think that's right to do that because it means it remains on the risk register and we can keep a very firm eye on it, if you like. So in terms of the risks, at table 2, it kind of talks about there are 17 risks that we've identified as our major risks. 15 of them were identified as very high, but we reduced that down to 3 once we'd applied mitigation factors. And those essentially were reduction in the budget, the implications of Brexit, and also obviously COVID-19 as well. An appendix attached at the back lists those 3 in terms of what the risks are and the sample controls measures that we're putting in place that reduces the score, and then goes on to highlight the other risks that we have identified and the residual steps or the control measures that we are taking to reduce the score down to a residual score which is more manageable. Really, I'm happy to take questions on some of the risks that are in there if you'd like to discuss them, but essentially committee is asked to approve the recommendation that the contents of the risk register as provided there are noted.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this just now? Councillor Harrow.
Thanks, Lynn. Why is Brexit a risk for education in South Lanarkshire? Can I ask? Be naive.
Yeah, I think Tony McDade, do you want to come in there, Tony? I can't see you on the screen.
Thanks, Councillor Loudon.
Thanks,
to Councillor Harrow. Our employability team, some of our employability funding comes from the European Social Fund, and obviously there is a discussion at the moment around the UK Prosperity Fund and what that means for us and whether or not we're entitled. So that's one of the very obvious ones for us that we sit, and you'll see a paper later on about the work of that team around positive destinations, graduates, foundation apprenticeships, and many other aspects of work for that group of young people. So that for us is very relevant to us just now. There are obviously other incidental parts around potential staffing issues, etc. But that's a very practical example for you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Allison.
Through you, Chair. On failure to improve educational achievement and attainment, to meet the aims of the National Improvement Framework, I'm very much aware that within South Lanarkshire, our own staff are performing well within our cohort, but Scotland as a whole is seen at the moment as to slipping down international standards. Does this risk assessment against the National Improvement Framework take that into account, or is it simply within Scotland risk that we are assessing here, Tony?
Okay, Tony.
Thanks, Councillor Allison. We have that annual disagreement, don't we, around whether we're changing the international standards of education, because and I have an involvement with the OECD just now and their report that will come out with Curriculum for Excellence, so we will await that with interest. I think in a very practical sense as well. We want to, from an international perspective, we want all of our children and young people. For me, this isn't about the stats. This is about our children and young people doing as well as they can within our schools on a day-to-day basis and achieving their potential. So from a National Improvement Framework, we look as a local authority. The comparative information is important, but it's about exactly what, it's about us knowing our individual schools, our individual children and how they get better in their literacy, their numeracy, and indeed when we get to the senior phase of their curriculum. So ultimately we do, you're quite right, we do, Councillor Allison, we do look at it from a national perspective, although I suspect we will agree to disagree around the international discussion.
Thank you very much, Tony. Councillor Allison, you want to come back in?
Just going to say, it just shows how important education is. The answer is improving every year.
Thank you both. I'm sure this is a conversation we'll pick up another time as well, potentially in a year's time, if not before. Any further comments or questions on this report just now? Happy to accept the recommendations. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on just now then, everybody, please. Moving on to just dealing with multiple documents. There we go. Item 10, which is page 95 in your pack, and this is Standards Quality Report 2019 to 2020, and Carol Mackenzie is going to take us through this. Thank you, Carol. Love the background.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good morning to everybody. Before we begin, I'd just like to direct members' attention to the appendix to this report, which is a copy of this Standards and Quality Report 1920, and this is the document to which this report refers. So to the paper, the purpose of the report is to provide members with some background and information around this document. And I think it's important to state up front that this year's version, while still providing some key information, is somewhat of an abridged version of the previous years, and this is purely down to the unprecedented situation that both schools and we at Education Headquarters have had to adapt to in response to the global pandemic. And it also helps explain the slightly late timing presenting this report, as normally it would be taken to the first committee of the new school year. So on to sections 3 and 4. These provide a background and rationale for writing this report, and the report is designed to complement our existing council protocols for reporting and progress through the improved system, and links very closely to the report that Des has delivered. Section 5 describes a summary of the contents of this report, which reports on the period from August 19 to June 20, and it provides high-level summary messages around our achievements during this period under the headings, and again referring to the previous conversation around the National Improvement Framework. And each section describes key successes and achievements, as well as outlining the challenges and next steps for us as a resource. Members are asked to be cautious around the interpretation of the data contained within this particular report, as it does cover the period when the schools were closed from March to June 2020. However, even with that caveat, there are encouraging signs of progress across all areas. I don't intend to summarise the whole report due to time constraints, but I would like to draw members' attention to a couple of the points. So under the section School Improvement, again, up to the point of closure in March 2020, SLC again received 100% rating, positive inspection grades, and I note that members were supplied with more information around this in a previous committee report. Under the section Supporting Leadership, 37 colleagues across the authority successfully completed their into headship qualification, which is a nationally recognised one and puts us in a very good place regarding succession planning for our school leadership. Under the section Teaching and Learning, there has been a continued focus on training, not just of our school leaders, but our classroom teachers, and many have taken part in both local and national training programmes. And although both literacy and numeracy data is based on the latest that was available, because last session you may be aware that the government decided not to collect data around literacy numeracy levels because of the pandemic, but members should note the general improving trend in these areas and the continued focus for us at headquarters for training, development and support to ensure our children and young people have a sound knowledge of basic skills. Already alluded to by Des, our health and wellbeing strategy has been firmly underpinned by SLC's wider attachment strategy, and this approach has been particularly crucial at this difficult time for children and their families, and that all schools and services still place a relentless focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And really this report concludes with a brief summary of our response to the COVID situation since March 2020, and this has been a fast-moving and challenging period for those leading schools and for those of us who are assisting our school leaders. However, while this final section does provide an overview, it is already somewhat out of date at the time of writing it. Because at the time of writing, schools were open for all pupils, and that clearly does not reflect the current position. So it's been a very, very fast moving picture, but that does give you an indication of some of the support that was provided to schools during this period to help them cope with the challenges they were facing. And we have currently robust monitoring arrangements in place when we're looking at our new remote learning offers, and we will update members at the next committee around this. So to conclude, Chair, committee is asked to approve the recommendation in section 2.1 that the Education Resources Standards and Quality Report for 1920 be noted, and that it be noted that future reports will be available in the autumn of each year. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much for going through that, Carol, and thanks for making the point about the timing as well, and we appreciate how much things are in flux at the moment, and the publication timescales for papers and so on as well. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this item for Carol? Well, happy to accept.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Carol. Okay, we're going on to item 11 just now, which is COVID-19 update, which Des Dixon is going to take us through. Begins on page 127 of your pack. Thank you, Des.
Yes, thanks again, Chair. I have the pleasure, if that's what you can call it, of delivering this report on COVID-19. And the purpose is to try and provide an update on the education resources response to COVID-19 by our schools and all of our educational settings, particularly following the new Scottish Government guidance published on Saturday the 19th of December, and then subsequent supplementary guidance on the 6th of January 2021, and of course the move to remote learning. In paragraph 3, we've highlighted the safe systems of work, infection control measures, the personal hygiene arrangements in place in schools and nurseries, which have been opened since August, and on the daily assessment meetings that we still undertake with public health when there is a positive case involving a child or an adult. But adapting to the new guidance and keeping connecting is very important. And in paragraph 4, we give just a taster of what's been a key aspect for everyone. And of course, that's keeping people safe, and of course, communication and engagement. We want to provide as much clarity as possible to schools and our educational settings, our professional associations, a variety of stakeholders, and of course yourselves as elected members on what is the professional health guidance and educational guidance that subsequently follows. And I think, Chair, even since writing the first version of this report for committee, things, as you say, have been a-changing. So I'll try and set out some of the key aspects. I would also draw your attention to the timeline that we've attached to the report at Appendix 1 for reference. And of course, to Carol's favourite subject, remote learning. In paragraph 4.3, we make reference to the changes to the SQA examinations, and that's outlined in paragraph 4.3. And as you can imagine, regular dialogue has taken place with the secondary school head teachers, our staff, the professional associations, the trade unions, and of course the SQA and parents and young people themselves on the impact of the decision for young people and teachers. I think it's fair to say that Stuart Nicholson has been at the forefront of discussions with the SQA and with the West Partnership and schools on this particular matter and continues to do so. But on Saturday the 19th of December, the Scottish Government announced changes to the opening of schools and our settings from January 2021, and we took a sharp intake of breath, as well as the new restrictions associated with level 4 for the Christmas and New Year period. A special meeting was hastily convened with head teachers on Monday the 21st of December in advance of the school holiday on Tuesday the 22nd to explain the potential impact and what needed to be done. Further details of these arrangements and the guidance is actually provided in 4.6, and a link to that guidance is there for members. In paragraph 5, we again highlight the arrangements for the phased reopening of schools in January 2021. And I think it's important for committee to note that the essence of the First Minister's announcement on Saturday the 19th of December was to keep young people and children safe and teachers from the new variant of the virus. Therefore, the guiding principle is that if children can learn safely at home, they should. But local authorities were invited to look at supporting vulnerable children and those of key workers and to look at more in depth at remote learning. So what did this mean in practice? Well, our schools finished for Christmas holidays on the 22nd of December and were due to reopen, as you probably know, on Wednesday, the 6th of January. The new guidance stated that for the majority of pupils had now been extended, the holidays had now been extended until Monday, the 11th of January, except for vulnerable children and those of key workers, with the eligibility criteria highlighted in paras 5.2 and 5.4. Tony McDade, the Executive Director, in partnership with the professional associations, sought approval for an in-service day from the Scottish Government in order to give staff the opportunity to plan for a safe return of children and for those coming in on the 7th of January, and that was welcomed by our teaching profession. And of course, we're trying to keep an eye on the aspects of school transport, free meal provision during this particular period of time to support our families. So the week beginning the 11th of January, all children moved to online learning. And in paragraph 6, we highlight what the return to pupils will look like. And Carol and her team and other colleagues have done a tremendous job in providing guidance for our schools at very short notice to try and reassure them on what remote learning and guidance is, and obviously to take that guidance to our school staff. And in paragraph 8, we provide further details on the definition and expectation of what remote learning can deliver. And certainly one thing, it is not sitting at a computer all day, that's for sure. And then We give an insight into what I'd mentioned earlier about the digital inclusion agenda. At paragraph 7, we have given an indication of the number of digital devices for pupils and young children that has been purchased by the council. And I don't want to steal Stuart's thunder, but there is another paper at committee where Stuart will provide a more in-depth insight into what the numbers are since they have changed since we prepared this report for committee. And in paragraph 8, we highlight a fairly lengthy aspect in terms of remote learning, both in definition and indeed what Carol would say, that the expectation is that schools will provide high quality learning experiences during this particular period. And I'm sure that's really welcome. And then not least, paragraph 9, we continue, and this still continues to be the case, that we engage with Test and Protect and our college in NHS Lanarkshire to help them with the challenges that they face. I would wish to reassure the committee this morning that that assessment of any positive school cases involving a child or member of staff still continues and did so over the Christmas and New Year period. So in conclusion, Chair, and a part repeat of maybe what I said in my earlier report, but I'm sure this committee will recognise that our staff have worked incredibly hard since August, keeping our schools open under challenging circumstances. There is no doubt they have faced and rose to another challenge in terms of moving to a different model of learning at short notice, and in trying to keep staff, parents, carers, children and young people and all who support the delivery of education services, like our janitors, our cleaners, catering staff and others, including our professional associations, our trade unions, all updated before the 22nd of December, which was a huge challenge. And I would also like to say the support of members of this committee was also a key factor in enabling us to move forward in a dynamic fashion, which is the way of it during this pandemic, or indeed any pandemic. So it's a short gap way through of what has been a huge challenge, Chair, this morning. So the committee is asked to approve the following recommendation, and that is to recognise the efforts of staff in our schools and educational settings to adapt to the changing guidance, and in being agile to respond to these changes whilst ensuring the safety and well-being of children, young people and of course staff be noted. And of course we don't do this alone. The partnership arrangements and protocols in place with NHS Public Health, who lead on the incident management of cases, is operating on a daily basis to ensure that the well-being of our staff and individuals is at the heart of the assessment process for each case. And that the timeline of the new guidance, which we've tried to provide this morning, gives an insight into the impact for our schools and settings, is listed in Appendix 1 to be noted. So, Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for going through that, Des, and fully endorse the comments you have made at the end as well. Thank you also for providing that timetable towards the end of the report. It's actually very useful to see it all set out like that and really brings home the magnitude of the changes that have been happening over the last couple of months. Councillor Mars, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, like you, I am very pleased to read this report and would fully endorse the hard work of the staff involved. In particular, I'd quite like to highlight that this report, although focusing on the learning, it's worth noting the support that staff are offering to our young people in terms of well-being, and also to their parents in the myriad of ways that they're communicating with families to make sure that home learning is as easy as an experience as possible. And that is critical to ensuring that the learning experience is as positive as possible. So yeah, hats off to all the staff involved.
Thanks very much, Councillor Mars. Councillor Donnelly.
It's on the same vein as Councillor Mars and the negative reporting that we have with the TVs about home learning, which actually disturbed me when they got a hold of families and the kids all about at different levels of learning. So I'm pleased to see this report and know that within South Lanarkshire we are trying to deal with that problem and give the support and back up to all families where they need it, and the children especially as well. And the teachers hopefully are supported there as well. Des, Tony, I mean. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Allison.
I think, first of all, Chair, it's very important that we're all associated with Desi's comments regarding the effort that had to be put in, not just from Tony and Almada Towers, but individual head teachers, teachers who had to put together at very short notice in a holiday period an offline learning programme. And it's moved forward greatly from the spring. One of the things I think I raised with you earlier, Tony, last week, was the importance of not only having that offering, but ensuring that all children are engaged. I realise that's not something that staff members can guarantee, but I think we need to make sure that we are contacting those who are not engaging. Speaking to parents from a wide variety of backgrounds, I think that was one of the areas where many pupils in the spring did not engage. Started slightly, but it disappeared. And I would really encourage education to try and identify pupils that are not fully engaged. I realise you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's very important that the horse is there, though, and you encourage it to drink. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Tony, did you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Alston. And in fact, you are completely right on this. And I also think from our monitoring perspective as well, is for that reassurance. And I would echo the point. This has been about how our teachers, staff on the ground, our school support assistants, our cleaners, our janitors have responded. It's not about central staff. Our role is to support schools on the ground, and I think that has been, I would echo the work that's been done on the ground by everyone in order to try to make that move to remote learning as straightforward as possible. But it is an imperfect world. It doesn't replace children coming into our school buildings on a day-to-day basis, because that is where the best place we want our children to be when it's safe to do so. But we do have monitoring procedures in place in our schools. If you think about it from their perspective, the difference this time around is that at the moment we're not in a hub environment, we're in an individual school environment, and that supports children and young people, and it also allows staff to make contact with those that are not engaging. But you're quite right, there will be some young people with the best will in the world, and no matter how many times we try to engage them, there will be some that there will still be a vulnerability with, and those will still mean that we're anxious. We will have systems in place to try to make sure that's minimised, but that would still worry us as well.
Thanks very much, Tony. Okay, Councillor Nealon.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I've got two questions for Tony, if that's okay. One is very quick and very straightforward, and the second one a little bit more complex, if that's okay. Tony, while the children are learning at home online, if a child is unwell with something other than COVID and can't participate in the online sessions, are parents still supposed to ring in and report that to school?
No, we wouldn't have the normal circumstances, but in terms of if it meant that the school was if, for example, it was a day and the young person or child could catch that, because remember that the day-to-day delivery of the situation could be caught up. We're in a scenario in which we will then, through recorded lessons, through some of the Google Classroom activity, can be caught. I would say if it's starting to get to more than that, that interaction with the school is important. So I think if it's just that very short term, they're not feeling up to it this morning, then we would say, no, you don't need to go on that basis. But if it was going to be something more than that, that was going to impact on that level of engagement, then our procedures are that we would ask you to be in contact under the normal procedures with the school. Or you can email the school, remember, as well, so it doesn't need to be that phone call, the school office, and that will be then from a secondary point of view to the pupil support manager, but in a primary perspective to the deputy head teacher, principal teacher or head teacher.
Thank you for that. The second question, if that's all right, Chair, is in a continued vein with online learning. There seems to be disparities in policy uniformity regarding online learning. Some authorities in Scotland have got a cameras off policy very strictly for privacy reasons, and some have a cameras on policy, while some are leaving it to individuals to decide whether they have the camera on or off. While privacy is very important, it's giving rise to potential child protection issues, as some of these children are remaining unseen out with the household. What's the council position on the use of cameras during online lessons for South Lanarkshire?
Sorry, Councillor Loudon.
No, it's okay. Then you go.
Thank you. We say that it goes to individual level, that we look at that live interaction. We have not directed on this, and for a couple of reasons. We do think that at school level, the teachers and the head teacher know the schools well. They know the level of training, and they know the interaction. And indeed, in any school, inverted commas, environment, they will deal with issues of engagement, lack of engagement, and how that's dealt with. So in a sense, that's no different to those children, young people being in front of you. People have to come up with solutions to that. We believe that those solutions are best at school level. However, we do provide advice and guidance. In our advice and guidance around remote learning, we do talk about safeguarding. We do talk about if you have any issues, how you would deal with that. But what we don't do is we don't prescribe in this situation, because some lessons are more suited to the camera off scenario. But it might be that you have a group of 5 children and young people that you want to have that camera on interaction with them as the teacher, but we want to have that flexibility, because this isn't an exact science. This is something that, while we're much better at it, the level of interaction and the level of interaction with the child and the young person, some young people prefer it, some don't. So we try to give some parameters around safeguarding, and your point is well made around safeguarding, but we don't then prescribe. We then try to put a system in place that would allow the member of staff to highlight any issues, either to someone within the school, be the principal teacher, or indeed if the head teacher had really significant concerns, to us. So we hope we've struck a balance with that.
So just to clarify, Tony, if that's okay, Chair, what you're saying is you're leaving it up to individual teachers to decide whether they want the children to have the cameras on or the cameras off?
Well, I would say that would be at school level, not the individual teacher. So that's a school level discussion. And for us, we don't direct it at an authority to school. We talk about the parameters, but that would be discussed at school level.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Just to add to that, it would also be the case in terms of, you'd asked about a national policy, Councillor Nealon, but nationally, not all schools are using the same systems for this type of interaction as well. And then even interactions between schools across the authority are not all using the same system at the same time as well. So this is where, as Tony says, it starts to get quite complicated, because it's producing a set of guidelines which could be then applied in different ways according to the scenario, according to the task, or whether they're on Google Meets or they're using another system at the time. Thank you for your question. Does anybody have any other questions to ask on this just now? Any other comments? Councillor Mars? Councillor Mars?
Councillor Mars, you're on mute.
Apologies. I'll keep this brief, but actually, if I could maybe offer an example of my experience as a parent to give Councillor Nealon reassurance that we, as a family, we have a significant number of children in my household, and we're all working in different ways. And I'm really aware for my younger children that using Google Meet once a day and having Zoom calls for parents who have any concerns on a separate platform if parents are having problems with Google Classroom. The email system, I mean, my children seem to be onto their teacher all day long, to be quite honest. So there are a myriad of ways that I am very sure that the teachers are noting well-being, and any concerns would be investigated further. I'm absolutely certain. So, and it is working very well from my experience. Literally, my daughter took her cat to show and tell on Google Meet. I'm really aware that the teachers, in the way that they normally would in a school, it's not just about talking to that child. They're picking up on signs and indications that there may be issues in the very new ways that we're working.
Thanks very much, Councillor Mars. I saw another couple of people nodding and smiling as well. My son didn't realise until last week that I could see the conversations he was having with his history teacher, and just how many interactions and how many daft questions he was asking. So there's certainly lots of two-way communication. Thank you. If nobody has any further comments or questions on this, are we happy to accept the report as it is just now?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So relatedly then, we're moving on to item 12, which is on supporting learners and families. This is about digital inclusion, begins on page 135, and Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and clearly this paper follows on certainly from Des's paper and has been referenced earlier in the meeting as well. I think before I talk about the paper, I think some of the points have been very well made, that the situation we face now is very different to that in March, and I think that systemically we are much better prepared for remote learning than we were. And the purpose of this report then is to advise members of the progress made through Education Resources to take forward the digital inclusion agenda. Section 3 of the paper outlines the additional funding of about 1.46 million that was made available to the Council to support digital inclusion in response to the situation noted during the first lockdown that some children were unable to access education in a meaningful way due to having either limited or no access to appropriate devices and internet connections. And I note that there have been other steps taken to provide devices, and some of that is referred to in some of today's papers as well, to provide digital access, but this significant concerted initiative allowed us to significantly extend the scale and the reach of that programme. So section 4 sets out the three main parts of the bid. Education had already undertaken an audit working with our schools to identify free meal entitled children who did not have access to devices or whose families did not have an internet connection. Some 2,200 devices and 480 connectivity solutions referred to as MiFi or mobile internet devices were required to support these as our immediate high priority or priority 1 children and families, and that formulated the first part of our bid. But beyond that, during that process of engaging to establish what families had available to them, schools were coming back and talking to us about other groups of families who were struggling with access. So some of those on the cusp perhaps affected by in-work poverty issues, reduced income as a result of the pandemic, families where several children were sharing a device, sometimes sharing two with a parent trying to work from home. So part 2 of the bid sought to provide another 3,200 or so devices, including some with touchscreens to support children with ASN, for schools to distribute to such families on a needs basis. And then finally, we recognised that simply sending out devices and sending out connectivity devices too would be potentially insufficient. So we looked to get a person to provide support, acknowledging that families might not only need support with the technical bit about getting set up, but also with the access to Glow, the access to Google Classrooms, the learning bit, if you like. And it's already been acknowledged the importance of contact, the importance of having that wee bit of softer, if you like, approaches around how we manage the whole digital inclusion agenda. So section 5 of the paper outlines progress and impact to date, and I'm pleased to say that our person is in place, is working really hard and engaging with families and providing support and advice. But at the start of this programme, supply and demand was a huge early issue. We were able to access some machines, some devices through the Scottish Government supplier XMA, but we were advised that nationally we were looking at 12 to 14 weeks lead time, that Hewlett-Packard, who's the main supplier, had decided that they would service only the internal US market. They were not going to export devices and so on. So supply and demand was becoming something of an issue, as was increasing costs. Fortunately, we were able to access stock from RM through our partnership working with them. They prioritised their order, and it meant that we were able to get devices much quicker than that quoted 12 to 14 lead time. We are now in a position where we've distributed more than 4,500, probably closer to 4,700 devices and about 750 MiFi connections, and we do expect that to rise to closer to 5,500 devices over the coming weeks. And indeed, RM were able to report to me yesterday that we were going to get another couple of hundred touchscreen devices and another couple of hundred ordinary devices over the next week or two. This has been a phenomenal logistical exercise and technical exercise to get these devices set up. They've been configured by RM so that not only will they work in children's homes and quite happily connect remotely, but they will also be compatible, so if they want to bring them into school, that they will connect to in-school networks as well. And there was a veritable fleet of cars, vans and individuals providing deliveries to individual schools. So that was a huge effort, and I would acknowledge and commend the work of everybody who was involved in that. Para 5.6 notes too that training was provided for school staff to provide further support for pupils in terms of getting connected and using the devices, as well as providing the ongoing guidance, advice and a range of digital tools to support learning. And as was referenced earlier on, this is done through our Staff Learning Centre, an online facility that was developed in response to the first lockdown. Para 5.9 notes that we do continue to engage with Scottish Government and to monitor digital access through our schools. Much as this has been a very positive initiative to date, and some comments are included at the end of the report, it is recognised that this is a live and an ongoing issue. However, although we're far from complacent, I would note that this has gone from being a source of real frustration and concern for us all to being something that has now made a positive impact for very many of our more deprived young people and families. And with that, I refer committee back to the recommendation in section 2 and ask that the action by the Council through education resources to meet the needs of families regarding digital inclusion to support learning at home be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's really quite a remarkable achievement when you see it set out like that in the face of an international, let alone a national supply crisis. So thank you for taking us through that. I've got a couple of councillors wishing to speak. I'm just going to take them in the order they popped up here. So Councillor Donnelly, please.
Just to give my congratulations to this report. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it shows you and highlights the poverty within our communities, and children would not want to put their parents to that expense. So us being able to access the grants in order to buy the devices to distribute it to families in need is absolutely fantastic. We couldn't have done it without that grant from Scottish Government, I might add, and it's actually probably helped children to be eager and keen to participate in that learning. Thank you very much. I'm just so amazed at that exercise. I can't compliment it enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Drybrough next, please, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that just in my ward, a lot of young people have benefited from the Chromebooks, etc. But one of the other things that I think's been really, really helpful has been the remote learning online support that's gone out from the document that's gone out from the council. And a lot of teachers and parents alike have said, you know, at parent council meetings that the fact that it's there is saved them reinventing the wheel. They're not all having to put out the same information. I just wondered if that's going to be expanded and that other things could actually be done that way and save every single school putting out things, that they could maybe go out once but go out to them all. I just wondered if that would be a possibility.
Thanks, Councillor Tony. Did you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Loudon. You're quite right, Councillor Drybrough. That's what we will try to do, and obviously Carol has a responsibility around the remote learning offer, but we certainly will expand. That's a working document for us, and as things evolve as they are, and we will certainly add to that. And we're very keen that we're trying to make sure that there's a relevance to the documents, but at the same time not absolutely drowning people. And I see that Carol maybe wants to come in, Councillor Loudon. It might be.
Yeah, sure, Carol.
Yes, look, thank you very much for that feedback. That's really good to know. We have tried to make things as easy as possible for schools by putting things together in the one place. But as part of that as well, what we're really encouraging schools to do, and we've been blown away by the response, is we have got an area on the SLC Squared, the staff learning website, which we're sharing schools' good practice when it comes in. So this may be things like ways of engaging pupils in terms of, you know, tracking their engagement. There's communication. There's additional examples of communication for parents on there, and we're trying to make sure schools that not only we're helping schools, but this time schools are helping each other. So the information is probably, you know, more, you know, than we would like to send out, you know, all of a sudden, but we regard that as necessary to support our head teachers. And you may be aware that nationally Education Scotland have already started a scrutiny exercise of the support that councils and that schools are offering, and we've taken part in that, and the feedback has been very good. They've received copies of all our documentation, they've had a look at some of the good practice examples, and currently are speaking to 7 of our head teachers about their remote learning offers. And you know, indications are that Education Scotland will be very impressed by the offers that these schools are giving, and in fact we're confident that they could dip in right now to any school. Obviously it's a work in progress for people, and you know, things are still being ironed out, but we are pretty confident that we could go into any school and get a robust offer which is way enhanced of what March brought, because of the learning that has taken place. And we focused a lot of our energies between August and December on learning the lessons that March to June had taught us, and making sure that schools were equipped for this eventuality. So I'm not saying we're pleased it happened, but it is nice to reap the rewards of that hard work that went in from all the teams, and from especially the digital team, who did a outstanding job in preparing schools to be ready to learn in this way. So that was just a wee bit in additional information for everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Carol, for that wee bit extra. Councillor Walker.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, Stuart. It's just a clarification. In section 5, I know you've said that you've assisted 700 people to become connected to the internet. And apologies if this is my IT illiteracy, but see, in terms of the full numbers of 4,000 or whatever it is, are they connected to? Are they all connected? Are they able to use the Chromebooks, or is there a gap there that we could have people sitting, although they've got the Chromebooks, are still not able to use them? Or am I reading that wrong? Thanks.
The devices were, all of the devices are connected to the internet. We were aware, as we started looking at who had access to devices or didn't have access to devices, that some families did not have internet. So in those situations, we provided the internet connection as well as part of that overall service. Yes, fundamentally the exercises around having young people able to connect and to be in touch and to contact. So there's a distinction between the number of devices required for children who didn't have access and a smaller subset, if you like, of families who did not have an internet connection. What we found was some of the feedback was interesting, that many young people used free Wi-Fi in places like McDonald's and places like shopping centres to access internet and to do their social media activity, their online activity and so on. And obviously with the restrictions in place, that had gone and people were absolutely cut off. So one of the I suppose the side benefits of providing connectivity to families around the supporting the digital inclusion and the educational agenda is it allows them to be more connected across the piece.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you. Councillor McAdams.
Thanks, Katie. Stuart, again, it was comprehensive and informative, so thank you very much. And obviously it's been a great job that's been done to date. When I was reading the paper, it was a question I came up with, and if it's answered in the paper and I've read it incorrectly, then I apologise in advance. But this is what I wanted to know. See if the families identified that have no access to the digital devices at home, the ones that are in receipt of the free school meals and the income support, how many of them are having to share equipment?
Through this, we're trying to make sure that where we have one or two, as far as possible, they should not be having to share equipment. There may be circumstances where families have a device between 2 and that is perfectly sufficient. And what we've said is if there are access issues, then they should be letting us know, well, in the initial tranche, the schools contacted them, and further down the line, if there are families who are struggling because they are sharing devices and because the situation has changed, that's one where they would come back to the school and we would be able to do something. But the starting point was to try and make sure that all young people had access to a device.
Okay, Chair, can I ask a subsequent, please?
Yep, when you go.
Is that okay? Thanks, Katie. Stuart, look, that's amazing. I am not doing down anything that's been done, because the fact that you've actually managed to do this to this extent is absolutely amazing, and I don't think anybody is going to disagree with you there. Have we basically said to the parents and made it clear to the parents then, for the people, because obviously this is going to the people that have been, like, you know, severely disadvantaged, okay, that haven't, you know, in a worse situation that you or I are in. So it's brilliant that we've made sure that each of the households has got a piece of equipment. I'm just thinking about, you know, and we all know it, it's just like for people that have got more than one child, so they've got two children, and it's just like, you know, and the teachers are on for a certain amount of time, and then what you've got is, you know, you could have a primary 1-year-old and a primary 7-year-old, both of them important, but what if basically the primary 7-year-old's getting, you know, the mum thinks, for talking's sake, the primary 7-year-old's more important for his education, whereas we know, basically, for anybody that's been involved in education, that primary 1 is just as vitally important, in fact, maybe more so, because of the, you know, early learning in the informative years, you know, up to like primary 2, for the information that the children need to take in. I'm concerned about, that's a concern that I have. So I would like that we could make it clear to the parents that have one piece of equipment, you know, for 2 children or 3 children, whatever the ratio works out as, that we don't want those children to be disadvantaged. We don't want those parents to feel under pressure. We don't want them to feel embarrassed that they've been given something free so they can't ask for something more. I think that we need to actually look at that in our budget to see what we can actually do, not look at it as giving free stuff away, but look on it as making sure that as many of our children in our community can get the best education. Because at the moment, what we've got is it appears to be a level playing field now between the children and the hub and the children that were getting online and at home, whose parents could take the time to do it. Because the hub children before, it was just childcare, whereas now it's a much better system because it's like equality across the board, because they're both getting the same, like, you know, levels of learning, whether it's in the school or whether it's at home. But for those children that are having to share a computer, they are disadvantaged. So I would like us to see what we could actually do about that, to bridge that gap.
This is turning into a bit of a speech rather than a question.
Katie, that's me finished. That's the answer I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before, I think I'll bring Stuart in a second, and I think Tony was wanting to come in as well. Just to be clear, though, we don't have a one device per family policy, so just to be careful with any implication of that. Okay, Stuart, did you want to come back in just now?
Yeah, I was going to say, sorry, maybe I didn't make that clear. We are certainly providing multiple devices to some families, and in 513, there's feedback from a primary colleague who has a family with 5 children, and they were able to, previously they only had access to a single device, I think it was a phone, and they now have multiple devices to allow multiple access. And that was one of the criteria that we set, and we were getting feedback from schools, and we've certainly been able to do that in some circumstances, yes.
Thank you, Stuart. Tony, were you want to come in on this as well?
Yeah. Thanks. It was a similar point to Stuart's just made, Councillor McAdams. We don't have a one-to-one device policy, and we nor will we. And I think we have to be really upfront about that as well. This is about vulnerability and the children that don't have access to devices, and that's what we try to do and prioritise with that. Schools have also been very imaginative with it, with some situations. So for example, I'm aware of some secondary schools giving out keyboards. Lots of our schools are giving out their devices to borrow as well, but we will not be able to make a commitment. We'll not make a commitment today around one-to-one device activity. But the remote learning offer gives us some degree of flexibility as well. The remote learning is about recorded lessons. The remote learning is about Google Meet and tasks that are set, as well as a live recording activity. So you hope in that discussion with a family, there's that level of discussion, because there's also, it's not just about the device. There can be a family, a person could be working and they could have a 7-year-old who's trying to get on, and that person needs to be on their work, but actually might be involved in a live activity with their child's learning. So we need to be able to provide as much flexibility for the family as possible that's not exclusively around device and being device dependent. What we hope with this is that we've cracked the situation where we had children who had no access at all, either connectivity or devices. And what we are hopefully doing with the information that we have, that we were confident that we've now cracked the bulk of that. And I think for us, from a learning perspective, that is a game changer for us, but that won't mean that everybody has a one-to-one device.
Thanks very much, Tony. Just on that as well, I would encourage, as with any other topic which comes up here, things obviously change with family circumstances. Schools are very responsive and very good at spotting that as well. But if anybody knows of any families who are needing a bit of extra help and support at the moment, or their circumstances have changed or so on, then please do report that up to officers, and we'll have a look at what can be done at HQ level as well as at school level. I've got a few more people wanting to speak on this. I have Councillor Callaghan and Councillor Mars.
Thank you, Katie. I've lost the leg of my specs, so I'm holding them on, I'm afraid. Just on what Monique was saying there as well, you know, it's different situations for different families, and certainly in my experience, the schools have been absolutely amazing. You know, they're telling us that, you know, a phone really isn't good enough, that a tablet in some situations can be good enough, and they're talking about, you know, when that's appropriate. And you know, but what they're saying is ideally, you know, a Chromebook is what they're looking for. So the schools are really, really interacting with parents at parent councils and things too, and really giving them some guidance and giving them some support, and they've been really, really encouraging with it there. They've also been really flexible as well. I mean, I was in a parent council last Tuesday, so schools went back on Monday. I was in parent council on the Tuesday night, and they'd made little tweaks already to how they were delivering. You know, they were putting all the school lessons up in the morning rather than like doing them one by one through the day, different bits and pieces like that. So I think it's amazing, the flexibility and, you know, just the way that our head teachers are looking at this and the way they're taking so many different things into account, and they're basically surfing the wave and making sure it all happens, and they make it look effortless. Clearly it won't be, but they actually make it look that way as well, and I think that's fantastic. And just to close off, excellent work, absolutely brilliant from everybody that's been involved in this. It's just, I just can't believe that it's been pulled off. It's just terrific. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Councillor Mars.
I think Councillor Callaghan's just to a large extent stolen my thunder, so I covered much of what I would say. What I would add is that while having the devices is absolutely critical, and I am delighted that people have been so fleet of foot and being able to support families in that way. For me, it's it's not just the devices; it's that the support is there in all the other ways as well as the device. And schools have been so flexible in being able to do that and ensure that families are supported. And also, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know whether other members will be aware that even this week, parents are being surveyed to say, how's your experience? What can we do better? What are you finding are particular difficulties to get in touch with? If schools have not already been contacted, they're actively seeking that from parents to ensure that the support as well as electronics is in place. And I think also, very briefly, Katie, I'm aware of time, that we should also highlight that our young people are working in a way that whilst we would never want to be in this situation, they've learned a resilience and a lone working strategy that maybe wouldn't have come so quickly. And I think it's really good to see, certainly my young people, able to work independently and to resolve issues themselves to a large extent, which is something that I think absolutely should be highlighted.
Thanks, Julia. It's like Carol was saying earlier, I have to try and hold on to the positives. Thank you. Councillor Donnelly, your hand up.
Thank you, Katie. It was just in another vein in terms of the substance and the sustenance of the vulnerable and people who were accessing free school meals. I think we've done extremely well between education and finance, and we have over 90% of our people that are accessing free school meals are getting money paid into bank accounts, and I take my hat off to that. Well done, fantastic achievement that's been done there. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Councillor, and to everyone in finance who's been involved in that as well. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments on this just now, we're happy to accept this report.
Agreed.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Right, we're on to item 13 just now, which is on Youth Family Community Learning Service. This is an update paper, begins on page 139, and Anne's going to take us through this. Morning, Anne. Afternoon, Anne.
Good morning.
No, morning
Oh,
still.
No, we're still in morning.
Still in morning.
Thank you for that. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of this paper is to provide an update to members on the delivery of the Youth Family and Community Learning Service provision for vulnerable families during the period following the previous update presented to committee last August. In terms of the background to the report, paragraph 3.2 explains that the paper provides an overview of engagement activity, service delivery and impact on communities, recognition of the work of the service, and the work undertaken to support the progression of national strategic developments. There's also information on activities that took place to mark the 50th anniversary of the Quay in East Kilbride. Section 4 describes how in recent months members of the South Lanarkshire Youth Council and the Scottish Youth Parliament have been active in representing their peers at local and national level on a number of forums, and I would draw members' attention to the detail of the last 3 bullets in paragraph 4.1 on page 140. These young people have been active in the following areas. They have participated in the consultation on the Scottish Youth Parliament Manifesto to help shape Scottish Youth Parliament policy for the next 5 years. They participated in the Black History Month planning team within the Scottish Youth Parliament, and they attended the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child session with the Scottish Parliament Equalities and Human Rights Committee to share their views and experiences concerning the integration of the UNCRC into Scottish law. Section 5 describes 3 developments supported by a successful bid to the Youth Work Education Recovery Fund. Paragraph 5.3 provides detail in relation to enhancements to the Care Recovery Curriculum Model, the Act of All Ages programme at Hamilton UC, and the Youth Family and Community Learning Service STEM programme, which has been expanded to include the arts and is now known as the STEAM programme. The service successfully bid for over £100,000 to support these programmes. Section 6 details the range of awards achieved by learners, and paragraph 6.1 describes the work undertaken in relation to the training of leaders and assessors to support the long-term sustainability of the awards programme. The range of awards include Duke of Edinburgh, John Muir Discovery Award, Food Hygiene, Lowland and Moorland Leader Awards, and awards owned and operated by Youth Scotland, which are also accredited on the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework. Turning then to sections 7 and 8, these describe the Pathfinder and Junior Pathfinder programmes that are operational across the 3 secondary schools and 2 of the primary schools in the Cambuslang and Rutherglen locality. The Pathfinders programmes are embedded in the work of the schools and provide ongoing support to families with children on the edges of care, with the aim of improving outcomes in relation to attendance, achievement and attainment. Section 7 describes the involvement of the service in a highly successful food insecurity pilot programme, and there are quotes from participants at paragraph 7.2. The full report can be accessed via the link at paragraph 7.3. Section 9 details the schools who have secured the direct services of youth, family and community learning officers using their PEF funding, and paragraph 9.2 describes how this group of staff complement the work of the school in areas including promotion of health and wellbeing, achievement, securing attendance, improving relationships and removing barriers to learning. Paragraph 10.2 describes the reopening of premises in August 2020 and how that was managed through a staged process of development of safe systems of work and risk assessments and in line with national guidance. Section 11 describes the range of activity on offer for adult learners using social media platforms, distance learning packs and recreational outdoor activity, and that included walking groups. And paragraph 11.3 further describes some of the activities available with the aim of supporting positive mental health and wellbeing and, importantly, reducing social isolation. Section 12 describes the service's involvement with the Connecting Scotland programme, which targets disadvantaged families and children and those young people leaving care up to the age of 26. Paragraphs 12.4 and 12.5 detail that following successful application to the programme, the service was allocated 165 iPads and Chromebooks and 120 MiFi devices for distribution to vulnerable groups and individuals. and a programme of delivery and support has been developed to support the use of these devices. Section 13 details the impact of the work of the service, and I would highlight paragraphs 13.4 and 13.5, which describe the highly successful You Wanna Bet youth work programme. And there is the possibility of this work featuring in a national documentary, which will explore the dangers of teenage gambling. Paragraph 13.6 lists the involvement of the service in national developments which benefit the community learning and development sector across Scotland. And I'd encourage members to access the links in 13.7, which highlight the extent of the work of the service in national publications and on social media. Section 14 details the workforce development activity and continuous professional learning activity that has taken place during the period. And finally, Chair, in October 2020, the Quay in East Kilbride celebrated its 50th anniversary as the first purpose-built youth facility in Scotland, and Section 15 describes the range of activity that has taken place to celebrate this significant milestone. Turning then back to paragraph 2.1 or paragraph 2, and the committee is asked to approve the following recommendation: that the activities, that should read ability to adapt, and the impact of services delivered to meet the needs of vulnerable children and families be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'm happy, a belated happy anniversary to the Quay Centre. That's quite a remarkable achievement. It was also really interesting to read this report in the context of the previous conversation we've had as well about particularly targeting young people who were disengaged with school or whose attendance had been poor during the start of the pandemic. Thank you for taking us through that. And does anyone have any comments or questions on this report? Nope, happy to accept. Oh, sorry, Councillor Donnelly, the last minute. Thanks,
Just to say that I have visited Universal Connections, and I was absolutely blown away with the work they have done to get children who disconnected to reconnect, and the awards. So fantastic. Hope that keeps up. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Thank you. Okay, if we're all happy to accept the recommendations of this report, we'll, yep.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. We'll move on. We have Anne doing the next two reports for us. So we'll just move straight on to item 14, which is additional support for learning review, begins at page 151. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to inform the committee of the outcome of the review of the implementation of the additional support for learning review in schools, and to advise of the Scottish Government's response to the review in the form of an action plan, which was published in October 2020. Section 3 describes the background to the report, which was that a review of the implementation of additional support for learning in schools was announced by the Deputy First Minister in January 2019. Angela Morgan was appointed as the independent chair of the review in September that year. Paragraph 3.2 describes how the review was implemented between October and December 2019, and Angela Morgan undertook a desk review and an analysis of evidence that informed the engagement phase. She moved out and gathered the views of stakeholders across Scotland, and that included a visit to South Lanarkshire. So she spoke to stakeholders here as well and submitted a report to the Scottish Ministers in COSLA at the end of February 2020. Paragraph 3.3 describes the areas that the review looked at. They considered how legislation works in practice in the area of additional support for learning across all educational settings. They looked at the quality of learning and support available for children and young people, and included in that was the measure of overall achievement and positive destinations, which can obviously be a challenge in this area. They looked at the different approaches to planning and assessment to meet the needs of children and young people, and the roles and responsibilities of support staff, teaching staff, the notion of the leadership role, education authorities and national agencies, and they further considered those areas of practice that could be further enhanced through better use of current resources to support practice, staffing, or other aspects of provision. Importantly, I think one of the first matters that the review report dealt with was the answer to the question, what are children and young people saying? And that is at the very beginning of the review report. And the main messages from our children and young people are detailed there in section 4. But turning to section 5, I'll take you through the 9 themes in terms of the findings and recommendations, and maybe highlight a couple which we might view as particularly important. So the first theme is one of vision and visibility. The third bullet point down there specifies that achievements and successes of children and young people with additional support needs must be celebrated publicly and must be given parity with attainment and examination results. Fifth bullet point, that the national measurement framework must be further developed and must be revised to ensure that parity. Theme 2 is in relation to mainstreaming and inclusion. The third theme is about maintaining focus but overcoming fragmentation. And in particular, the second bullet point, I would want to highlight that local authority planning must incorporate the implications of additional support for learning for all services. The fourth theme is in relation to resources, and the fifth around workforce development and support. Theme 6 talks about relationships between schools and parents and carers. And the first bullet point in particular wants to examine further the practice in relation to working together to include planning for transition, and that should support and promote positive relationships. We can at times experience that to be a situation that maybe promotes conflict, and that's not something that we would want to see in the future. Theme 7 is around relationships and behaviour, and this really is about seeing the notion of behaviour as being an additional support need rather than sitting distinctly from that, and that is in line with the legislation in this area, so that's something that would want to be developed further. Theme 8, and linking to the next paper, is the notion of understanding rights, and highlights the incorporation of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child and its impact on additional support for learning legislation and any processes that might need to be amended and developed. Theme 9 is around assurance mechanism and inspection. And just turning then to paragraph 5.2, again, I would highlight that the overarching recommendation of the review is in relation to the participation of children and young people, and is that children and young people must be involved in all decision making relating to additional support for learning matters. Section 6 details next steps, and paragraph 6.1 has a link to the government's action plan with responses to each of the themes that I've just highlighted. And paragraph 6.2 highlights that inclusion services will consider the recommendations of the review, and we're doing that currently, and we'll be building those into our established planning mechanisms and also the draft children's services plan that's currently being developed. Just going back then to paragraph 2, to section 2 in the recommendations, the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations. Number 1, that the outcome of the additional support for learning review chaired by Angela Morgan on behalf of, because she isn't, the Deputy First Minister be noted, and that the contents of the Scottish Government's action plan on the additional support for learning review also be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne, for going through this. I have a couple of councillors asking to speak. Councillor Cooper to start with, please.
Apologies, colleagues, if there's any barking or squeaking. I've got an unruly 6-month-old pup running about here. It's not me that's frothing at the mouth. Well, Anne, I have to say, with 40 years of experience in this field, it's one of the most depressing reports, and I'm sure you'll agree that we could read in education. The same old themes over and over again have come up over the last 40 years. We've not managed to crack transitions to, to the extent that we would wish. We still get the same amount of anxiety and often aggression from parents who feel that education's against them rather than working with them, and the same old nuts are there time and time again. I just wonder how much longer we're going to keep reviewing and reviewing and reviewing and coming up with the same issues and never finding a solution to them. I know there's been some slight movement and improvements over the years, but I'm sure, Anne, you'll agree with me, as being long-termers in this field, that it's really just the same thing that keeps reiterating itself through every government we've had, every review we've had, same issues over and over again. One of the disappointing things, I think, is that we no longer have the ring fence funding for additional support needs, and we no longer have the training programmes that we benefited from at Jordan Hill and at Notre Dame, that teachers can go along and actually achieve their diplomas and their MScs and postgraduate qualifications and have those funded for them. We don't seem to have that now. The courses have disappeared, and we've moved into a model of whole school support, whole school development, and gradually we've seen the depletion of support for learning staff in schools, principal teachers, behaviour support staff, and all in good, well and good is the whole school model. But I'm sure that teachers on the ground would agree that they did benefit from having the specialist teachers within the system. So I'm sorry, Katie, it's a statement rather than a question, because it's not one that Anne could solve, neither could Tony. But really, colleagues, we need to keep pressurising government to put more funding into additional support needs. It's disappointing that we're back where we were about 40 years ago when I first started in this. I'm starting to sound like that councillor that retired from Lanark when I was a teacher, was always his catchphrase. It's really disappointing, Anne.
Councillor Cooper, sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think when you see the same themes repeated, as you say, that you've seen during the course of your career, it can be quite disconcerting at times. What I would say is that my feeling would be that there have been improvements, I have to be honest. I think as we've become clearer about, well, GIRFEC coming on board and maybe the roles and responsibilities of agencies becoming clearer, I think the whole rights of the child agenda, the children's voice agenda, I think moving towards better partnerships with parents and better relationships with parents, I think probably I feel less of the conflict than I did maybe earlier on in my career, when there was just an expectation that there was going to be a war as soon as you mentioned a school leaving age for a child who was leaving one of our special schools, you know. I think things are more positive now, and I think people have worked hard to make sure that the breadth of opportunity available at the other side, with the loss of the adult training centres and things that we've had over the years, but are maybe they're more inclusive, I think, in terms of the approaches to developing provision for our young people on the other side. But it's a work in progress and it's slow. But I'm hopeful, and I think we are moving in the right direction. This review, I feel, in terms of where it starts, I made the point that it started with the voices of children and young people, and I thought that was important. But like you, I used to despair every time somebody was saying they were going to do another review of school leavers, you know, coming out of the special sector and where they've gone and what their experiences had been, because it was the same report written over and over and over again. I think we're moving on. We'll come to agenda item number 17, which is the response to the call for views on the Disabled Children and Young People Transitions to Adulthood Bill. We'll come to that as well and be able to discuss that. But I understand where you're coming from, but I have to be hopeful. Okay. Oh, could I also say, sorry, Chair, just in relation to the training issue, when I did my diploma, it wasn't paid for. Things changed through the years. I think I had to pay for my own, but whereas a cohort before me got theirs fully paid for. So things did change as time went on. We do have a training budget, so people can apply, and we, going through the Inclusive Education Service, we can allocate training budgets for people to undertake their certificate and then their diploma. So there are still those opportunities, albeit they're delivered in a different way. So hopefully that gives another wee sense of hope in that respect as well.
Thanks very much, Anne. I noted with some alarm actually as when Margaret had started to speak there. That's 20 years ago this year since I started my teacher training. So I do recognise that feeling of things coming round in cycles, and it's something that you hear teachers saying quite a lot. But like Anne, I do think there have been improvements over that past 20 years, and I do have hope that things are continuing to be reviewed and looked at as we go along. I've got another couple of councillors looking to come in just now. Councillor Walker, first of all, and then Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a note it mentions specifically a action plan, Scottish Government action plan in relation to support needs and transitions. Will there be a specific action plan for South Lanarkshire? Are you going to take the overall action plan and apply that to South Lanarkshire? Because otherwise, and following on more briefly from what Margaret said, otherwise it's just a broad visionary statement. If we had an action plan that was specific to this local authority, then at least we could monitor it, we could evaluate it, we could highlight why perhaps we've not made the level of improvements that we should have been making, and highlight that in turn to the Scottish Government if, for example, it is an issue of resources, which I'm sure it is, particularly in relation to transitions where we don't always have the options available for positive destinations that need to be looked at through the commissioning process, all of that. But I think we need to look at it in more detail as it applies specifically to South Lanarkshire. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you. What we will be doing is looking at the national recommendations and personalising them to an extent, because there will be areas in which we are well ahead and other areas that we would want to develop further. The other issue is that some of these areas are for multi-agency work, not single agency. So that's why we would take them into the context of the Children's Services Partnership, and we would create multi-agency groups around to progress the work there, and then it would be reported formally through the structures of that group.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margaret, for that question, and thanks, Anne. So if you said, Anne, this is going to be multi-agency, so it'll be being reported through CPP and then associated structures. It's maybe something we could look towards bringing to future education committees as well, sort of pull all of that together and have a look at it in the sort of local context as well as the national one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Walker, Councillor Callaghan.
Thanks again, Katie. Yep, I have to agree. Reading the Morgan report, there were parts of it that were quite devastating, actually, to be quite honest with you. And I think it's really significant. You know, we're looking at 30.9% of our children. You know, it's almost a third of all the kids that we have in school there, and we're not doing good enough for them. One thing that really quite concerned me on it was the fact that, you know, dependent on the children's behaviour, that tended to be where the support was targeted. So children who don't cause problems and are reasonably quiet in school are not getting the same support as children who are disruptive. When those children still need that support there, it's not quite there for them. It was a wee bit worrying to hear as well that, you know, there are still some teachers that really just don't get this, and I'm certainly not tarring every teacher with the same brush there. There are some amazing teachers out there, an awful lot of them. But as a parent to an autistic child myself, I can understand that to a degree, because it's expertise that we're really talking about. You know, teachers cannot have that right down nitty-gritty expertise where they come to a point where they instinctively recognise, you know, where some of the behaviours and where some of the issues are coming from, because you just get such a wide variation. Don't get me wrong, a lot of teachers get to that stage in certain areas there, but it's very, very difficult for them. It's difficult for me as a parent, and I live with my child since the day that they're born, and have a second child now on the pathway as well, who didn't necessarily come to my attention straight away, who was much further down the line, despite having an autistic child diagnosed. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation for teachers, and the need for that expertise and knowledge is just, you know, I can't highlight how important it is. On a positive note, though, you know, GIRFEC has made a difference. It has made really positive changes. I'm also really glad that we've got the commitment from the Scottish Government as well about incorporating the United Nations Children's Rights Charter as well. I think that's a great thing to become forward to. So yes, we do need to do better, but I really look forward to the Scottish Government action plan and looking at how we can make some progress with this. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Callaghan. Anne, were you wanting to come back in there?
I feel as if I really need to give a bit of reassurance at this point. Remember, the report's a national report, and just in relation to the South Lanarkshire response to these issues, the children that we're talking about are those identified under the Education Additional Support for Learning legislation. So we know the categories of those children. We have a well-embedded staged intervention process that every school works to in terms of intervention and planning for these children, and also around specific conditions. We do have comprehensive training programmes, and our psychological service is probably leading nationally in relation to the work it's doing around the autism framework, and you know about the attachment strategy as well. So I think I just felt that I wanted to provide reassurance in relation to what we're doing around planning for the needs of the broad range of children with additional support needs, because Councillor Callaghan was right to highlight the fact that 30.9% of our school age population, do come under the auspices of this report, but we do have well established structures to plan and meet the needs of those children.
Okay. Thanks very much, Anne. Thanks for extra bit of information. And thanks to Stephanie as well for the wee sort of neat segue into UNCRC, which will be coming on to the next paper as well. I've got two councillors I'll take briefly before those. Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back in to say that, I think it's positive that I think we need to move away from focusing. We've always focused on the pupil deficit issue, and the Scottish Government have highlighted the need for change within a curriculum for excellence. So we need to look at the curriculum deficit model as opposed to the pupil deficit. I think that's a positive, and I think we need to ensure that our secondary schools, who have always been the more difficult and challenging area to get away from the pupil deficit model to the curriculum deficit, that they take that on board. That's been a long-standing issue in subject specialisms, that they have a design curriculum and they tend to blame the pupil for not being able to access it, rather than actually looking at the curriculum itself and realising that there's different models of learning and different methodologies need to be used for particular pupils. So I think that is that they've come back to that again and they're saying it again. I think that's excellent.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Okay, Councillor McAdams, please.
Thanks, Katie. And it's just to say, I think this is a great report. And I also think that the ripple effects that will come from this report is going to make a big difference in South Lanarkshire, especially for our children, that basically that their learning at times can be hampered due to medical conditions they have that affect their additional support needs. And I think this could actually be what I hope would be an opening for one of our local children, Cole Thompson, who's been trying to get the medicinal cannabis prescription on the NHS, and I think that this could possibly be a way that would actually help him. So I warmly welcome it. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Right, if there's no further comments or questions on this, I'll be happy to accept the recommendations.
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for those comments, and we're moving on to, as I said, incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law, and begins on page 157, and Anne's going to take us through this again. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report then is to inform the committee of the incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law in Scotland, excuse me, and to advise of the response made on behalf of South Lanarkshire Council's Children's Services Partnership to the Scottish Government consultation on the incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law. Moving to section 3 in terms of the background to the report, on the 1st of September 2020, the UNCRC Incorporation Scotland Bill was introduced to the Scottish Parliament, and it's deemed one of the most significant pieces of legislation to be introduced since devolution. A consultation on the bill was opened on the 7th of September and closed on the 16th of October last year. You'll be aware, as stated at paragraph 4.1, that the UNCRC is the global gold standard for children's rights, and it sets out the fundamental rights of all children. And I've appended a copy of that, a summary copy, at Appendix 1 for your information. Paragraph 4.2 highlights that we already use the UNCRC as a framework to ensure that we consider children's rights whenever we take decisions, and to help provide every child with a good start in life, and also that it forms the basis of the getting it right for every child approach. And you'll all have been in schools and seen beautiful wall displays in relation to the UNCRC and its impact on the pupils within that school. Turning then to section 5, and paragraph 5.2, which lists the main elements of the bill, I would want to draw your attention to the last bullet point there, which states that the bill would requires listed public authorities to report every 3 years on how they comply with children's rights. And what that does is it further reinforces the requirement that's already laid down in the Children and Young People Scotland Act of 2014, and we're compliant with that. I'm going to move now just to section 6, and you'll see there that what I've listed is a range of activity linked to the Scottish Government in developing the rights of children and young people, and highlight the last bullet point, which is a response to the UN Committee's 11 recommendations on taking a children's rights approach to responding to COVID, and I've given you that at Appendix 2 for your information. In relation to next steps then, what I'd like to highlight is that the next steps to be taken by education resources, or following on from that, was that a response to the consultation was submitted on behalf of South Lanarkshire Children's Services Partnership, which is there at Appendix 3, and that following enactment of any legislation, further steps required to be taken to audit and identify any potential gaps in training, policy formulation and procedures at establishment, resource and council level to support the implementation of the legislation. And linking back to something that I said earlier, the intention would be to establish a subgroup of the Children's Services Strategy Group with representation from across all council resources to be set up to progress that work, because this is something that would affect the council as a whole. I would want to draw members' attention just to some additional information that we got yesterday. We got a courtesy email to advise us that the Scottish Government has responded to the committee's report on the UNCRC bill, and that the stage 1 debate on the bill will take place this afternoon at 3:15, and it's on the parliamentary TV channel for anyone that would like to tune into that. So that's sort of hot off the press in relation to that. Turning back then to the recommendations, committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that the main elements of the bill and the response to the consultation on incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law in Scotland be noted, and to note the analysis of the Scottish Government's response to the UN Committee's 11 recommendations in taking a children's rights approach to responding to COVID-19. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this paper just now? No, happy to agree the recommendations.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Be keeping, so it's 3:15, Anne, this afternoon, was it?
Yeah.
3:15 or
yeah.
3:15 on parliamentTV.scot if anybody would like to watch it. It's
That's stage 1 debate.
Stage 1 debate. That's great. Thank you. Very significant moment, of course, because it with the first country in the UK and I believe the first country in the world as well to look at incorporating the UNCRC into domestic law.
I think we could have been at the time of writing the paper, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that somebody's feet is, but I'll check that out.
First in the UK still anyway.
Certainly first in the UK, yeah.
Hold on to that. Great. Thank you very much, Anne. Thanks for going through that. Okay, we're on to a second last item just now. Then everybody, item 16 begins at page 183, and this is on youth employability and work-based learning. And Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious of the fact this is quite a lengthy paper, quite a substantial paper, so I'll endeavour to keep my narrative as concise as I can. The purpose of the paper is to provide an update on the Youth Employability Services targeted employability and work-based learning programmes and how they've had to adapt and meet the challenges of the pandemic. Section 3 reminds us of the 3 main programmes, Aspire, Graduate and the Foundation Apprenticeships, and of the positive impact they've had, and Des already referred in his report to, for example, positive destinations. It does note the impact of the pandemic on less affluent families and the partnership working that's been required to continue to provide a strong supportive service. Sections 4, 5 and 6 provide detail in relation to each of those programmes, and they essentially compare the offer in previous years to what's been achieved this year and give consideration to what is planned for the year coming. In terms of Aspire, Aspire continues to provide individual support for those at greatest risk of not achieving a positive destination, and perhaps unsurprisingly, demand for that service has increased since April. And at Para 4.6 and 4.7, we note that there are currently more than 500 young people, 527 young people registered, and we'd anticipate that another 200 or so summer leavers will join that programme as we progress through the session. Plans to extend the college-based graduate programmes had to be significantly scaled back as a result of the COVID restrictions, and particularly the restrictions in place in the college sector. That said, we were able to provide 445 places in a diverse range of courses, and that's shown in table 5.6, and those young people were now able to access the new level 4 and level 5 foundation apprenticeship programmes. Our existing foundation apprenticeship offer continues to grow, and we saw more than 120 successful completions last year, both through the 1-year and the 2-year programmes, despite the challenges that the pandemic brought. The table in Para 6.4 shows that 81% of those young people moved on to further or higher education. 10% went into either modern or graduate apprenticeship schemes, earn as you learn, as they say, and around 6% went on into employment training or stayed on at school. Only 2% did not have a positive destination, and that 98% success rate compares favourably with the global number of just under 96%. Para 6.6 and 6.7 notes the changes required as a result of COVID, and 6.8 and 6.9 report, I suppose, the positive news, where our young people will be studying in terms of the current cohort and what that cohort are doing in 2021. Section 7 goes on to describe some of the planning already in place for the coming session, 21-22, and sections 8 and 9 note that this programme is funded, as Tony said earlier on, through the European Social Fund, and that future funding is in place until 2022. But we do recognise that this is very much a direct risk relating to Brexit, and work is currently underway to look at what happens thereafter, and looking at the Prosperity Fund that was previously referred to as well. Finally, the appendices provide case studies, the views of some of the participants, and I would commend those young people for sharing such insightful pieces. And if you haven't already had a chance to have a look at them, I would certainly recommend those as a worthwhile read to put, I suppose, a personal touch to sometimes the drier numbers that we provide through the programme and through their reports. I'd refer back, folks, and ask that members agree the recommendation in section 2, that the progress and planning for youth employability and work-based learning for our young people in the senior phase and post-school be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I'd just like to also add my thanks to the young people who did share their experiences for the end of that report. It certainly gave it much more colour and illustrated the points which we talk about in the committee very well. So thank you to them for that insight. I've got a few people to bring in just now. I'll start with Councillor Donnelly and then Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for the report that's just come up. One of the questions I would like to ask, I've not totally read all the young people's comments to decipher, but can we add, or is this a big ask, can we ask the amount of women and the amount of BAME that we took up the programme?
Thanks, Councillor. Stuart.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to get a bit more detail and break down that information for you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Councillor Callaghan, please.
Thanks again, Katie. Again, absolutely excellent report. As far as youth employability goes in work-based learning, 2% not going into a positive destination. That there are always going to be situations wherein that you're not able to connect with those children. And that's just absolutely unavoidable. And I don't doubt for a moment that when it becomes a possibility that, you know, we will look to actually support them as well. They will be able to access that support. But consistently, we have an excellent performance in this area. Really, really good. I think as well the introduction of the Scottish Youth Guarantee coming through as well, where every young person will have the opportunity of work, education and training, is a fantastic thing to bring forward. And I think lots of other local authorities could learn a really good lesson from a lot of the work that we do. So thank you so much to all of the team who are involved in this. It's fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Totally agree with your comments there, and also look forward to hearing more about the Youth Guarantee Scheme as well as that comes into play. Any further comments, or are we happy to accept the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Right, on to our final report just now, which is item 17, begins on page 193 in your pack, and this is a response to a call for views on the Disabled Children and Young People Scotland Bill. And Anne is going to take us through this. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Chair, and you've heard references to this report already. So the purpose of the report is to update the Committee of South Lanarkshire Council's response to the call for views on the Disabled Children and Young People Transitions to Adulthood Scotland Bill. Section 3 outlines the background. The Disabled Children and Young People Transitions to Adulthood Scotland Bill is a members' bill introduced by Joanne Lamont, MSP, to the Scottish Parliament on the 30th of September 2020. The call for views opened on the 16th of November and closed on the 11th of January this year. Paragraph 3.3 describes that the bill aims to improve opportunities for children and young people as they grow up, and would require, and I've listed there the bullet points, the Scottish Government to have a national transition strategy explaining how they're going to improve opportunities for disabled children and young people, a Scottish Government Minister to be responsible for improving opportunities for disabled children and young people moving into adulthood, local councils to have plans for each disabled child and young person as they move into adulthood, for Scottish Ministers to review and submit a report to the Parliament every year to update on how the National Transition Strategy and transition plans are working, and for people and organisations named in the bill to follow the aims of the National Transition Strategy. And what I would say to you is, you'll note when you're reading through the response that was made on our behalf, there are references to GIRFEC and to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in line with earlier discussions. The bill also enables Scottish ministers to give guidance to local councils about about transition plans and directions about these plans to local councils, health boards, integration joint boards and others named in the bill. In relation to compiling the response to the call for views, I would highlight to committee that a working group comprising the following representatives was established to discuss and compile that response. And you'll see that members of that group included a quality improvement officer from the Inclusive Education Service, a deputy principal psychologist, a team leader from Arch, a head teacher of one of our secondary schools for young people with additional support needs, a deputy head teacher from a mainstream secondary with ASN-based provision, a team leader and fieldwork manager from Social Work Resources, and a solicitor representing legal services. And the response is attached at Appendix 1. In terms of next steps, in paragraph 5.1, it highlights that it's possible that between the closing date for the call for views and the Scottish Parliament election in spring 2021, the bill won't have completed all the necessary stages, and therefore a decision on next steps has to be made following the closing date of the call for views. So we're currently awaiting that. We will monitor progress of the bill so that we're agile and ready for any changes that have to be made. And it's also worth noting in paragraph 5.3, just in line with previous comments, that there is absolutely universal support for the aims of the bill, which is to improve outcomes for disabled children and young people as they transition into adulthood. Turning back then to the recommendations, committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that the response made on behalf of South Lanarkshire Council to the call for views on the Disabled Children and Young People Transition to Adulthood Scotland Bill and the main elements of the bill be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne, and thanks for the information about the potential timetable as well at the end. Okay, I have Councillor Walker and then Councillor Callaghan, please. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as you said, Anne, there are a lot of themes running in parallel with the ASL action plan, and hopefully, more specifically, a South Lanarkshire action plan covering issues like the multi-agency response, issues with resources, availability of positive destinations, and also in particular which your response highlights, there needs to be a bit more clarity in terms of who's responsible for coordinating care plans and support plans, because that can be a bit of a difficulty at the moment, that's not always clear, and that can result in some of those care plans not coming to fruition in terms of positive destinations and various other things. I know part of the response there was highlighted that it was just another layer of legislation, that the mechanisms to deal with transitions are there, but I think it would be positive to look on it as something that will give it a higher profile and maybe actually accelerate progress in this area that we've acknowledged, although there has been progress made. We still have to do more. So I would welcome it in the vein that it will give a profile to this and maybe make us look a wee bit more in detail about the multi-agency reports and who's responsible for coordinating it and what the various issues are. So I welcome the bill from that perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And Councillor Callaghan.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I know I've come in the last several topics here, but I just felt I had to mention as well that Tom Kirkwood, who was out doing global discussions around neurodiversity, actually did pick out ARCH, autism, and highlighted them as well. It's a real accolade as far as South Lanarkshire is concerned as well. Tom's the president of the International Advocacy Practitioners Association and formerly of Autism Network Scotland. So I just wanted to get a wee bit in there saying absolutely brilliant. Well done to the ARCH team. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor. Okay, does anybody have any other comments or questions on this report? Are we happy to accept?
Agreed, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any items of urgent business, so that is it for today, everyone. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 16th of March. We'll obviously keep you up to date with arrangements for that, but that is us for just now. Thank you very much for attending today and for all of your contributions, and please take care of yourselves. I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.